You're listening to the podcast Coffee with Mike and Julie, Libertarians Talk Psychology. This is current commentary from an MBA businessman and a PhD psychologist.
Our son told me about podcast or YouTube video. The title of it was WTF Happened in 1971. And this video shows all kinds of graphs of our economics in our country taking a sharp deviation from a fairly healthy direction in 1971. Well, 1971 is when Nixon finally totally got us off the gold standard. No connection between the dollar and gold.
I directed Secretary Connally to suspend temporarily the convertibility of the dollar into gold or other reserve assets.
I'm going to play a Dave Smith monologue that kind of pulls it all together, but I'm going to make the point a little later that government ain't going to change. This is going to be, how do we handle it?
In other words, we're not going back 50 years and correct the mistake.
No, it ain't going to happen.
Nobody's going to do.
These governments aren't going to let us.
It's like the situation with Social Security.
Yeah, it's like
nobody's going to really be able to correct that.
It's like Social Security. So here's Part of the Problem by Dave Smith, episode 1026.
In 1971, Richard Nixon took the country off the gold standard, and when he announced that he just announced that he was temporarily suspending the convertibility of dollars into gold. And I just find this to be so interesting. Like I'm a real nerd for all this shit. Not like the type of nerd who can do math, but the type of nerd who cares about these random things. So this is actually what inspired Ron Paul to run for Congress, because he had studied enough Austrian economics that he knew that like this would usher in the age of big government. Because when you don't have a reserve standard for your money, there's nothing to check government from printing as much money as they can. And of course, all of the incentives are for politicians to do so. Like, why wouldn't they? Why wouldn't they want to buy up votes and not have to raise taxes and be able to just kick it off into the future? It allows them to do deficit financing. It allows them to fight wars that they wouldn't have otherwise been able to get away with if they had to tax people, you know what I mean? And of course, we've talked about so many times on this show that the evil thing from our human perspective, but the beautiful thing from like the, political class's perspective is that when you print new money, it really does seem like free wealth at first. It really does, because it almost is like that is the immediate effect. But then that, of course, has consequences down the road. But anyway, it's just so interesting to me that like that's what inspired Ron Paul to get into politics, and that he was so completely right about all of that. And just it's a real interesting moment in history. Whenever people say that, like every year when there's the debt ceiling negotiations, everyone always goes, America doesn't default on their promises. Like never in the history of this country have we defaulted on our promises. But of course, in 1971, we had like the biggest default on our promise. We literally just told everybody, we are not going to pay you what we owed you. Because this was the agreement after World War II, when we had the Bretton Woods Agreement, was basically that. And this is how America kind of tricked the world into becoming the global reserve currency, was that we said, well, look, we have so much more of the gold. Now that we fucking bombed the shit out of Europe and Asia, and we're the kind of most powerful country left standing that didn't take tremendous loss on our own soil. Hey, we got so much more of the gold. We're in such better shape. Here's the deal. You peg your currency to the dollar, and we promise you the dollar is convertible into gold. And so just make us the reserve currency. It's like you're all on the gold standard, basically. Then everyone went, all right, that's reasonable enough. And America had enough of a good reputation, and enough of a strong military that they were like, all right, we should go along with this. But then when it came down to it, then when we just started cheating and printing a ton of money, and they went, all right, we're going to call you on that. We'd like our gold. We just went, no, you're trying to manipulate markets, you're trying to attack the value of the dollar. We can't stand for this. It was so funny is that that's literally what Nixon said. It was basically these French are trying to manipulate markets and they're trying to attack the sanctity of the dollar, when they were just literally going, we're holding you to your word. Like, we want the gold. You said it's convertible into gold. And we were like, well, not anymore. It's really a crazy story. And then, of course, also tying into that story is that we then kind of moved over to the petrodollar. This leads to the kind of like permanent, warfare state focused on the Middle East and Northern Africa and stuff. So it's all just like kind of interesting to me. But man, it's amazing. Like, I know like monetary policy at times can seem like kind of like a compartmentalized little thing over here for nerds to focus on, but really it is like it's so much at the heart of everything. Like it's at the heart. It's not just at the heart of the entire economy, but it's at the heart of the entire society, the entire culture. Like it's like so much of even like our cultural rot has to do with the fact that we have this monetary rot. And I know it's like sometimes people don't see it that way, but it's really true.
Okay, so I thought that was a good description.
Yeah.
It gives us a little perspective over time and the consequence of what has happened. And I want to see if I can simplify this real quick, that the way this scheme works is these governments, and it ain't just our government, all governments, love to have control of the money. So this is all about a deviation from having stable money. That's all gold was you can't fake more gold. That's why everyone wants to go back to gold. But anyway, what happens is when these governments have control of how much money is in the marketplace, what they do is they print it. Then politicians are able to spend and borrow against the new money. And then the people, as it goes through the system, and it takes a couple of years to totally go through the system. The people that finally pay the bill, always the middle class. The poor people, of course.
Because it inflates everything the middle class is buying.
That's right. Middle class is buying it, and they're getting taxed, or it's inflated, but taxes have to be increased and all that. But it always is a three-part scheme. You print it, you spend and borrow it, and then the middle class has to pay the consequences.
Has to consume it.
Because the rich people, they know how to make use of print the money, and as soon they get the advantage of that newly printed money. And the poor people, they're always being rescued, so they aren't paying.
Yeah. I don't know if this applies, but Richard Nixon's national debt was $477 billion, and it has gone up and up and up. His debt to GDP ratio was 31, and it's gone steadily up. If you graph this, so Joe Biden's debt is 32, almost 33 trillion, and it's 119% debt to GDP ratio.
Oh boy, that's scary.
Donald Trump was 26. Debt to GDP was 110.
That's scary too.
Barack Obama was 19 trillion, 103%.
Yeah, and we like to say that these countries in Europe, Greece and Spain, and whenever that ratio gets over 100%, that they're in danger of collapsing.
Well, that's true. And George Bush was 72% debt to, and that he had 10. This is 2008. This isn't that long ago. He had 10 trillion. Barack Obama went up to 19 trillion. He doubled it. He doubled the debt.
Yeah.
He didn't do very well, did he?
Well,
that's not a good legacy at all. And it went from under 100% debt to over 100 with Barack Obama. That's my experience about these liberals. They can't run anything. In my micro community, they can't run anything. They can't stick to a rule. They're overwhelmed by their emotional needs to do stuff, and they're not good at management.
Well, I would go a step further. I'd say almost anything. You define a problem and you say, government, please solve this problem. They always make it worse. They disguise how much it costs to address the problem. But if you take the cost into consideration of what the government is doing to address a problem, they always make things worse.
Well, and so what would be your reason for why do they make it worse? Why do they ignore principles of good management?
To me, it's obvious. because they don't have the incentive to do it right. Their incentive is to buy votes. They know this stuff. This isn't a secret.
Yeah.
They know all this.
I'm not sure I agree with that. They seem, at the microcosm that I live at, they seem not to know stuff. They seem to be ignorant. I mean, the young psychologists are ignorant of the need for free speech.
Yeah.
I mean, the basic principle for psychology, they seem to be ignorant.
I have a hard time accepting that they don't know it when the information is right there, available. Ron Paul has been talking about it for 50 years.
You think there's conscious, willful neglect on their part.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking it's unconscious neglect. I mean, in order to do something correct, you have to be motivated. You're right. The incentives and motivations have to be correct too, but I just see more negligence on their part. Here's what I've kind of gravitated to. You know, there are three motivations. McClellan identified the three motivations as achievement, power, and affiliation. Those have remained to this day. You can assess people on those motivations. Conscientiousness goes with achievement. You know, actually, the profile for effective managers has power and achievement together, but not necessarily affiliation. Really good technocrats don't have high affiliation. But the pattern I find to be most difficult is the people with high affiliation and high power.
Yeah.
They don't seem to know what to do. Their self-deception is really high. I'm talking about my observations in the microcosm of psychologists. Yeah. They think they're right. They have the same self-deception that we all have.
I see that group of people acting, and it appears to me that they don't care what the right solution to the problem is.
Well,
as long as they're,
I can't argue with that.
As long as they're getting their affiliation and their power, they assume that that is the solution to the problem.
Well, then we're in agreement, because I think that's an automatic pilot that I agree with your assessment there. As long as they are affiliated. I mean, I had one colleague say, we have the best team ever. And I thought, yeah, well, your results suck. And I watched a meeting and she was saying, this is the best team. This is the best team. And so I thought, like, her affiliation needs were met, but she had no awareness to that her results was sucking. She was getting her affiliation, so that fits.
Well, we may be saying something really important here, that is how these people are able to ignore the achievement part of your three-pronged triangle. That's how they're able to ignore it, because they assume that if I'm getting affiliation and power, that is the solution to the problem. These other people, they have the wrong solution to the problem. They're trying to fix the problem. That's the wrong solution to the problem. The right solution,
I think we are onto something,
is affiliation.
Yeah. In a business versus a community in a business, you're going to align those results right to the problem-solving group. The problem-solving group and the leader or manager is going to be looking at the piece of paper that says their results suck. They're going to go, our results suck. I don't care. We're getting along fine, but our results suck.
I like this, Julie. So you come around to the thing that is different between government organizations and private organizations. Private organizations cannot ignore the results.
Yeah.
They can't ignore them. And sometimes they do, and they go out of business.
All
the time. No one grieves about it. No one moans and cries about it. That's just the way of the world. If you can't make money with your business, you go out of business. But in the government side of the world, they never go out of business.
Yeah, they just print more money.
Or whatever it is.
Whatever they do.
Affiliation and power, they take care of that, and that is the solution to the problem.
Yeah.
I like that. That's really good. And
well, I've been dwelling on this for a long time, trying to put the microcosm and the macrocosm together, because you really do take that stand usually that you think this is willful. And I guess I don't believe that can be willful, but I can tell you that human beings are unconscious, most of the time. So this thing about conscious willfulness, I don't really trust that. I don't trust that as overriding the automatic pilot that people have based on their personality.
Mhm.
So it's a real indication for a system with good feedback mechanisms and insightful leaders when we can get them.
Mhm. Okay, so I want to go back to the money real quick.
Okay.
So first of all, I just want to point out this is all about having a stable supply of money and not a supply of money that gets to be screwed around with by politicians. In other words, we don't have to have gold if they just wouldn't mess with the money supply with dollar bills. That would work.
It would work if it were just an
Bitcoin.
token.
Yeah, Bitcoin, if we went to Bitcoin and they didn't mess with the supply of Bitcoin, that would work. Anything that is a stable supply of money would work. But of course, everyone knows that as long as it's dollars, these politicians are already addicted to being able to mess with the number of dollars. So no one believes that they're going to live by limiting the number of dollars. But if you're tied to gold, you have to live with it. It just ain't going to happen. Well, we now know for 50 years now, the whole world is, in my opinion, knows, and they have no intention of going back to gold or a stable supply of money.
Well, there's only one way you could get that linked to something that somebody would measure. It would have to be very, very clear what the government is doing. You'd have to set that up to have immediate feedback from the voter as to what's being printed. And the fact is, I wouldn't know where to go get that. Where do I go to get the information of how much money has been printed today and what its impact on my dollar means? That would have to be made very salient, immediate, like this app on the money supply of U.S. debt. It doesn't have anything about how much money is being printed.
Yeah. You make a good point.
I think the Fed hides that.
Well, of course they hide it. But in addition to that, I think that information might be available. But this thing comes to life over a couple of year time period, which makes it really difficult
for the average person to track the impact. Yeah. And use the time delay. You'd have to have a proxy. Okay, so we're talking now about BMOD. And it's like, how does a person understand the consequences of another person's action? It's like the Fed prints money, and I have, let's just say for the sake of argument, I have a 25% reduction in my dollar. How do I feel that immediately so that I can vote differently? Okay, I would have to have a knowledge of that. I would have to have that information transferred to something that's immediate. So reinforcers and consequences have to be immediate. They can't be 3 and 4 years. So you're right. That's how they trick us, because we forget things over that period of time. Hell, we forget things over a 6-week period of time.
They do two things. They hide it, for one, like you say. They're trying to obscure it. And they spend a lot of time and money selling us on it. You know, hey, we're doing a good thing. We're paying for...
They manipulate us.
Yeah, they're manipulating us.
With propaganda.
You know,
so
we need to pay for Sesame Street. You know, poor people need access to Sesame Street, and they need cell phones. Poor people need cell phones. So if you have a heart at all, you need to be applauding us as we're spending money on these things.
Well, that's another part of it is people have to embrace the fact that when you're running a country, you're running a business. If you don't have extra money to pay for Sesame Street, you can't afford it. It has to be run like a household. You can't go over budget. You can't be 120% over budget.
But then we come down to the basic problem, which is there's a huge number of people, percentage, I don't know what percentage of our public, who thinks the free market doesn't quite work. It needs to be tinkered with to help these people over here and these people over there. It needs to be tinkered with.
Even if you go into debt to do it, those people that you're talking about.
Well, they don't think about the consequences.
See, that's my point is you have to make this salient and immediate. You have to find a way. Now, this is what the libertarians ought to do, because the system can't self-correct unless there is a feedback loop. We need a feedback loop on this. You know, if Donald Trump gets into office again, I mean, he's aware of that we're overspending, but he had to overspend. I mean, he got into COVID, and we don't know whether he really believes in sticking to a budget or not.
Yeah. I'll come back to the basic point I made at the very beginning, which is our leaders our governments, they have no intention of doing the very thing that you're pointing out needs to be done. Libertarians are going to talk themselves over the moon over this stuff, and they're going to be right, and no one's going to pay attention to them because the general population accepts the leadership and the confusion.
Well, I don't know if that's true right today, but anyway, we're in a chaotic time.
Yeah, but our leadership goes too far one direction or the other. The pendulum swings back and forth, but it never swings back to where it ought to be. It just swings a little more liberal, a little more conservative. We need to do the best we can as far as instituting the kind of things you're talking about.
Feedback, for immediate feedback.
And libertarians, of course, would be well positioned to lead those efforts. But then we as individuals need to, and I just want to, I'm kind of concluding this here.
Concluding, okay.
That as individuals, we need to start promoting the non-aggression principle that as long as I'm not hurting somebody else, I'm acting morally. In other words, the government is going to just get more and more regulations, more and more out of control, more and more control over the population, and we need to treat government just like we treated COVID. We either comply if we agree or we don't comply, and we don't feel bad about it because it's against the law. We feel bad about it because our behavior might be hurting somebody else.
Okay, so I would add to that if we can bring to immediate conscious awareness the idea that a country needs to be run like a business, and we could install that in people, and then we were to bring immediate awareness to variables like how much money is being printed as a proxy. We can't rely on a person to do things for their best interest because of the time lag. But before the time lag, we need a proxy. And that would be on everyone's mind. If we can make this very consciously salient, but that would be a trick.
Yep, it would.
But it would be useful.
But I like that. I agree with that.